I was going to share that I did not have a chance yesterday to the participant to share the recording of the session and the presentation of yesterday. I'm sorry, so I will send it later today with this recording. And maybe, Lauren, we want to welcome some people. Something that we discussed at yesterday's session, all of these sessions are independent, so you don't need to attend all. However, if you want to receive the recording of the session in the PowerPoint, the way we're sharing the information with participants is using the email list from when you registered in the RVSPL. So we would advise you, even if you may not have a chance to attend our session, if you want to receive the information, please make sure that you register in the PL.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about generating ideas, using mentor text in our practice, using anchor charts to support writers, as well as paper choice and notebooks. So we've had a couple sessions now, and if you are new, this is your first session, that's okay too. What we want you to do is just, we're wondering if there's anything circling in your head, any new wonderings or questions about things that we've covered, especially now that you've slept on it, you've seen a lesson, you've seen lesson planning, you've kind of seen the outline of Writer's Workshop. Or if you're new today, maybe some questions that you have, you can tell us why you're here. So we are going to use the Jamboard again. Julie's going to give you the link in the chat. So, yeah.
I'm coming, just 1 second.
So in the Jamboard again, if you haven't been here before, you'll see on the left-hand side underneath the cursor icon, you can select a Post-it note. And then you can add your thoughts into the chat.
These are anonymous, so please feel free to write your questions. These are the questions that we're using at the end of each session when I share with you the recording. We use these questions that we haven't had a chance to answer during our session to provide you with more information. So please go wild. Add your thinking. Lauren, would you like to change and put the live screen? I don't see anyone adding.
The live screen? I'm in the Jamboard right now. Can you not see it?
Yes. I'm just wondering.
Everybody's just waking up. Just needs their coffee to kick in.
Maybe no one has any wonderings. Maybe we did such a good job.
We're that good. Oh gosh. Wow.
Okay, girls, don't get ahead of yourselves.
Why do we don't take questions? Oh, here's one.
Okay, so in individual conferences, we will talk about conferring on our next lesson, but while people are just writing their thoughts down, one thing that I will say, and I felt relieved by, is when I learned about, we went and did our training, we heard from the master, Carl Anderson, and you'll learn about my love of him next time. And he said, and in his book, he talks about how terrible he was at it. Terrible when he started. So he'd sit down with the student, he's like, so what are you working on? And so it's awkward, and it's something that you definitely just need to kind of dive in and get your toes wet and keep going, and you are going to you're going to build on your experiences. It's awkward. It's something that just to be able to give a student live feedback on the spot without preparing or reading through or thinking about what you want to say or having something prepared can definitely be a struggle for teachers. So we will certainly address that in our next session, but know that it can be awkward and uncomfortable at the beginning for sure.
The other question about the kits, each school should have received the kits in 2014 not 2016, I believe. Every single school got the kits from grade 1 to grade 4. So every school should have at least one kit of each grade. And after that, most schools had to buy their own. So every school should have the material. We don't have, that was a grant or some money that we had that year. We haven't had that kind of money. We know some schools last year used the CIF fund to buy more kits. It's possible to share the kits between teachers, but it's easier to get your own if possible. I shared the link again to the Jamboard for the people who are joining us a bit later, because you may not have seen the link of the Jamboard. Good question about the group using Writers Workshop to plan and troubleshoot. So one place that we strongly recommend is the Facebook group. I love it. Sharing lots of tips and tricks and lots of conversation, like that troubleshooting. I find that's one place that I love. And actually Lucy Calkins is often replying to people. So that's one place to go. Another thing that we have done, now, obviously, sadly, we don't have the community of practice anymore, but we used to have some community practice around the Writers Workshop. And I like your question about planning it together. I know one school, Heron's Crossing, a few years ago, I was working with a team there, and what they did, they had a big team, but they all did their planning. The planning, as we showed you yesterday, it's a matter of getting used to it, but it can take time. So what we've seen powerful, what I've seen at Heron's Crossing was teachers team teaching. So the two, let's say it's a grade 2 teams, you may have 2 teachers doing it together, but then each teacher is planning. So that lesson planning that Lauren did yesterday, if let's say me and Sherry are teaching together grade 2, then I say, okay, Sherry, I'm planning the lesson for tomorrow, but then you will plan the next one. So you alternate, and at the beginning, actually, to make it easier, what we've seen is people putting their classes together just to feel more comfortable and to have more hands on deck. So that's one way to do it, to share the load. They were using, were they using notebooks or Google? I forget, but they were sharing all their plans on the same place, and that was quite powerful. So hopefully I answered that question. If not, add it. Oh, okay, good question about the word work, spelling, grammar, punctuation. Writers Workshop don't give direct instruction on that. They say that this should be outside of the Writers Workshop. Beautiful, fine and dandy. However, we know the reality, we don't always have the time in your schedule to have another day where you can do that word work. So some teachers, what they'll do is they'll use that Writers Workshop model, as we said, like for 3 days, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then sometimes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that's when they'll do that quick direct instruction of that word work. And the idea of Writers Workshop, which I kind of like the way Lucy Calkins was explaining it, was that the Writers Workshop is the practice. You learn about it in a different, but then the Writers Workshop is the opportunity for students to practice it, which I love, because then it helps students transferring it in real writing context, not just worksheet that sometimes students have trouble transferring into their writing. So Lauren?
So there are, however, kind of odd lessons here and there in the units though to support it, but like Julie said, it's not like a whole program that's going to teach you. But just looking in an example for the grade 1 unit, there's ones using familiar words to spell new words, capital letters, end marks help readers. There was another one about using there was another one in here about just using small sounds or words to build bigger words. So again, they're gonna be incorporated when they kind of, I guess, when they're developing the program, when they saw that it was maybe needed. So we're gonna do a little bit of writing. If some bigger words are starting to stall you, now here's a mini lesson on it. But it's not, but yeah, something like word work is not, it's not in there. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to keep going. We don't have a ton of questions on the Jamboard this morning, and that's fine. Perhaps once we start to get through, there might be some other things you want to add, or even better, you can add them into the chat. So that way that we'll be able to answer them quicker.
And don't hesitate, like your questions are really helping us to tailor this presentation to your needs. And remember, there's no dumb question. And most likely, if you're asking this question yourself, there's probably 5 other people who had the same question who were not asking it, who didn't feel like asking it. So feel free, like, as I said, share your questions with us, please.
So if you're just joining us, we've talked in a couple sessions so far about what Writers Workshop is. So the cycle of workshop. Yesterday we had talked about the mini lesson. It's about 10 minutes. We talked about the components. So beginning with a connection to kind of bring your students in, having your really specific teaching point that you're teaching them, having them actively engaged with the teaching point as well as their peers, and then linking it into their writing time. So today what we're going to talk about, and a lot of the questions that we've been getting, is just supporting independence, getting kids writing. How do I know that they're going to be writing for the full time when I'm trying to be conferring? So today we're going to give you a couple tips and tricks to support young writers. And like I had said before, a lot of these are used for reluctant writers as well, but what works for some work for all as well. So these are really great tips just for everybody. So once you get through your mini lesson, then this is the bulk of the time, is the writing piece. So students are independently writing, and this is your opportunity to be meeting in small groups, maybe one-to-one conferring, really working with students on specific things that they need to work on as writers. And then finally, there's going to be a little bit of partner work. And then your share at the end often is where the teacher is going to highlight perhaps some pieces of writing that they've seen in class today. Okay, so a couple of strategies that we're going to talk to you about for getting started with young writers. So one of the things that you might have heard me mention if you were with us yesterday in the mini lesson is something called the touch and tell. So before students have to sit down, have that pencil in their hand and start writing, we want them to map their thinking ahead of time. So one of the strategies is to touch and tell. Yesterday, one of the instructions in the mini lesson was you're going to touch and tell 3 pages. So the idea is you're going to physically touch the page, and you're going to tell or say out loud, often to a partner, you're going to tell them what you're going to be writing about. So if it was yesterday, as an example, as a seed story, I'm going to be writing about the hippo at the zoo who got his teeth brushed. When I walked up to the hippo pen, I could not believe that there were zookeepers in with the hippos. And all of a sudden, next page, they pulled out a toothbrush. I thought it would be a humongous toothbrush, but it's really just a small little toothbrush. Then I watched as they use this electric toothbrush and brush the hippo's teeth. So you're going to touch the pages physically, and you're going to say out loud so that you have orally rehearsed what you're going to write. It's easier now to sit down and to start that writing piece. For the earlier grade lessons, this is actually going to be a mini lesson, the touch and tell, and it's going to be something that's going to be put onto an anchor chart. The next one as well is, so what you'll see is the terminology that Writers Workshop uses is touch and then tell, sketch, then write. And so the next piece is the sketch and write. And I'm sure a lot of us have said, well, you can do your picture after you write, or after you're finished your journal, you can draw a picture. But the idea here is, again, it's kind of now it's more, rather than an oral rehearsal, it's a visual rehearsal of some things that are going to say. So giving students an opportunity to perhaps sketch a couple things about their story before they start the physical writing process. Now, we all have those students who want to draw for 40 minutes and add 17 colors in their pictures, but we need to really work with our students to tell them that now's not the time. You have 5 minutes to draw, no coloring. You get to use your pencil or whatever writing device you're using. This isn't an opportunity to put everybody's hair color in there. Because we really want them just to be focusing on drawing what they're about to write.
And Lauren, that strategy is extremely useful for your reluctant writers, right? What we want, the whole idea is we want students to get the message that they want to convey, the ideas that they have in their head. We want to allow them to throw that on paper as quick as possible. We want to remove any barriers. So your reluctant writers who are not confident in their spelling or their vocab, that these are the kids who will stare at that white blank of paper. So the idea is if you can just go and sketch, just sketch quickly, then at least after we can use that as an anchor and to add to your story. So that's that really change, that can change it for some students.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I go back and I think I was working in a grade 1 classroom, and I was asked to model some writers workshop lessons. And then the first lesson that I had done, I think it was just like talking about the process of how to write a story. And there was a little boy, and he said, well, and he was sitting there and there was nothing. And I said, well, why don't you draw a picture first? And his response was, I can do that? And I said, absolutely. And I think, and then I reflected back, because I was that teacher. I was like, well, you can draw a picture after you write. And so you need to kind of think about why do you have that in place, and why not, right? So again, not having tons of time to draw in color, but using it as an opportunity to get started with the thinking process. Another recommendation, and this is something that we were talking about with a couple teachers a couple days ago, was also just kind of getting some ideas out there. Because one of the pieces that we heard, that I think that every one of us have heard, is a lot of the times that there are stories that are very close to your example. So perhaps we have a student in our class and we know that they don't have a dog named Bo, but maybe, or they don't have a pet at all, but they write a story about their dog named Bob who locked the door. That was my example yesterday. So one of the things that we can do to get students writing is talking about an experience that everybody in the class would have. And so some examples, like the example yesterday that was in the mini lesson, is when their classroom rabbit named Magic escaped. And so everybody was there to experience that. And so everybody was able to write about it. Or when the bee flew into the middle of the class and wouldn't leave the teacher alone. Or when they found a spider on the carpet and they had to put a cup on top of it until the custodian came, or whatever it was. Having students be able to write about a shared experience and that you can kind of work on and brainstorm with together is something that'll really help some writers get started. And sometimes they will call it a trouble situation, because it's something that they'll really stick out in their mind, like, you know, when that spider was there, rather than when we went and had, you know, we were drawing outside. So something that there was a big event, definitely, that can be written about. And then, so when we get into things like upper elementary, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we discuss notebooks, is giving them strategies to brainstorm and to think about topics of their writing. So things that might be included here are mapping, maybe timelines of an experience that they had. So if you're going to write the timeline down, you know, what happened in that entire day, or what happened in that entire time that you're at the amusement park at Callaway Park, or whatever it was, to help kind of hone in on some specific things that they could really write about. As well as emotions. Emotions are definitely something that we all feel. And so having students be able to recognize those and connect experiences, times in their life with those emotions, and being able to kind of brainstorm that way are ways that we can get some really, really good pieces of writing, because a lot of people have had times in their life where they were sad, or times in their life when they were scared. So having students draw on emotions to create stories and really strong pieces of writing, whether it be narrative or whether it be a piece of informative writing, pulling in emotions is something that's going to really kind of motivate people to write. Any questions, comments?
I've been good. I've just shared a few ideas. Lauren, later on, I can't remember where, but I'll try to display something on my iPad just to answer a bit better Juliana's questions.
Okay. And I'm so sorry if I keep moving. I have my dog Bo is chewing on me because he's teething. It's really embarrassing right now. So I'm moving all over the place. That's why. Okay. So one thing that's really big with Writers Workshop in the elementary grades is paper choice. And so, you know, the big thing is we want students to feel successful. So one of the comments that we had the other day, which kind of has stuck out to me that I want to talk about is, you know, when we as teachers are writing an exemplar piece of writing, for students who are struggling to even get 2 words on the page, that's really intimidating. If I'm going to write an entire paragraph just kind of while I'm modeling, that's something that can be really intimidating. And then when they sit down with a piece of paper that has several lines, again, that's going to be super, super overwhelming for some students. So one of the big things in Writer Who Workshop is giving students choice in the paper that they use. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, so you can see here, so there's a large picture piece with just a couple of lines. Here, there's a picture piece with a few more lines, but if you look at the size of the lines themselves and the spacing, they're quite large. And then again, you can have ones that are just all lines, because you're gonna get some of those students who just wanna write and write and write. And then some of those students who, you know, even getting a line or 2 out on a piece of paper is really tricky. So if you give this piece of paper to one student, for example, and they fill it all up and they write 3 pages, and this person, they write 3 pages, they're both going to feel really successful that they wrote a story, no matter how many words they are actually physically writing.
And it provide them, like I still remember that little boy that I worked with, blank page, would not do anything, and then when he went to get 1 page that had 1 line, and he was cute, like he started writing his story and he had to go get 10 pages, and that feeling, madam, I need another page, like he was so proud, and every time he was going to get another page, he kept asking it like louder, madam, I need another page, like making sure that all of his classmates could hear him, right? And I think it's that feeling of success. Now, Sally had a comment about the use of paper. Yes, it does use a lot of paper. We won't hide it to you. And something we want to clarify with you too is that the paper choice, usually it's given to grades 1, 2, and 3, depends on your students, but usually in grade 3 and up, that's when you start using a notebook. The notebook could look different. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. The paper choice, there's different ways. Some teachers have been using Google Docs to cut the cost of the paper, but it says, though, in Writers Workshop, the more students are writing, and the fact that they're writing, it really helps that processing and that fine motor skills. So that's one thing. Something that I was brainstorming with Cindy yesterday was that students could do the writing. If the paper is an issue in your class, they could do the writing using a plastic sleeve, putting the sheet in a plastic sleeve with a fine tip dry erase marker, and then at the end of the writing they could take a picture and upload it in their My Blueprint or wherever. So that's another way that you could play around with the paper. Lauren, are you going to show where to find those paper choice? As well, on the left side, you see the picture of the folder that Lauren has. This is what we recommend. This is what's recommended for you as a teacher to keep the paper. So having a duotang, on one side, you've got that green dot. This is all the draft that students are working on. So today we're learning about the small moments. So you're going to put your sheet there. Tomorrow we're learning about something else. The kid may decide to start a new story on a different topic, but still using the teaching point. He's going to put all of his beginning, all of his stories on that. Towards the end of the units, when students are starting to move into that editing and revision mode, then they may go through those copies, choose the stories that they like the most, and that's the story that they will start extend. And that's whenever they're working on their final draft, they will put it on that section with the red dot.
Okay, so we have shown you, if you are new, we were showing people how to register their resources. So once your resource is registered, again, I would say the majority of people don't have their kits. This is something that we can walk you through once you have your kits with you. But once you click on your kit that you've registered, so this is the grade 1 kit, for example, you'll see it has all of these sections that you can look at. And so, for example, yesterday I pulled out this section for some anchor charts and some notes. If you go into the general information section and you scroll down, all of the paper choices are here. So if we talk like a box with 2 lines and I were to open that up, that's your piece of paper. That's what it's going to look like. If I want to look at something like a box with 9 lines, that's what that's going to look like, right? So that's a very, very, very different piece of paper for a student. So a student who's really reluctant, if you give this to them, they're probably like, no, thank you. But this piece is going to be a little bit friendlier because they're like, I could write a story on this page. So definitely knowing your students, but also giving them the choice. If you know there's a student who likes to write tons and tons and tons and is a really strong writer, but that one day decides to take this paper, totally fine.
Lauren, as you go back, I just want to answer a few questions in the chat box that are really, really good point. So one question is, when do we start get picky about letter size and letter settings on the line when they're printing? Honestly, this is what I love the most about Writers Workshop. The whole idea of it
what
is,
time?
oh, we'll ask someone to turn off their mics.
After work?
Jamie, Colleen. One thing that I love about Writers Workshop is the idea is really on the message. We are writing because we want to share a message. That's when me as a teacher, it shifted my thinking, because I think what I shared in one of the lessons with you guys was that me, as soon as I was getting the kids writing, I would start picking, oh, you didn't write on the line, you didn't. Really, I was crushing them wanting to share the message, right? So yes, we will start being picky about the letter size, the printing, the convention, the spelling, but after the ideas are on the paper. The big priority is we want to share the message that the student has in their head. And then the way we tie it with the grammar and the spelling and the letter is like, okay, buddy, you had so many good ideas. I love what you did on paper. However, look the way it's written. Do you think your readers will be able to understand what you try to share with us? Maybe there's too many mistakes that the reader won't be able to access your message. So that's how you kind of wrap it up. So same thing with the picking the letter size and and if it's not sitting on the line, that's how we can say that we can at the end, like in the draft, in the editing, that when we're making our publication, our publish, and the idea is like we need to share the purpose. Why is it important to spell correctly or to write on the line? Is for the reader to be able to access easily the ideas that you want to share. So that's one thing. Caroline had a message about that it's tricky because a lot of students are starting a lot of different stories, but not continuing their finished product, which is again what I love. And the best example, Caroline, that I'm thinking is me when I did my master. Oh goodness, how many times did I start a paper and I would start a paper and say, I don't like it, start another one. Like, this is the reality of writers. Often writers, when you have to do a writing, you will do different starts. You will start and sometimes you will start all over again because you didn't have the right start. So I think this is the idea, that students can do different ways to play with the different craft moves, but then at the end they need to create one. So that changed my teaching, because I was a teacher. So no, you start a story, you started a story about knights and princess and castle, and you need to finish it. And sometimes I was forcing kids like, no, you need to finish it until the end. Whereas sometimes like, oh, I don't want to write about that anymore. I'm not engaged. I'm not motivated by that story anymore. And then you change it. So I think you need to let them change. What do you do if you have two kids and multiple teachers as far as the
Jody talked about that already in the chat.
Yeah, I've answered it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. There was another question too about encouraging students to use both sides of the page, or is there a reason to only use one, for Paula? And so, you know, my heart inside wants you to use every side of the paper. And I think that encouraging students to do that just from like a kind of a, you know, planet friendly response is good. However, I would say again, for those students who are really struggling to write, if you give them a one-sided piece of paper and they write 3 pieces of paper, in their duotangs, they have written 3 pieces of paper. And so again, I think I would use it double-sided as much as possible. However, for some of those students, they might need to physically see that they wrote 3 whole pages single-sided so that they kind of have that confidence to keep going with their writing. I don't know, Julie, if you have any 2 cents on that.
Now, one thing that I forgot to mention with the paper choice, and that goes a bit to Caroline's question, sometimes they will have a lot of beginning, super important, whether it's in their notebooks or on paper, we want to make sure that students are writing the date. The date is super important because the date is what's going to show the progress. Like if we can look buddy, the first draft you did in September, look at only a few words, you didn't have much, but then having the date helps you tracking the progress that students are making. Aaron had a question about the student paper choice. Is it teacher directed? Absolutely not. One thing that I loved, one class that I was in, the teacher had on a table, like every time she started writer's workshop, she had all the different choice of paper on the table, and the kids went and picked whatever paper that helped them with that story. So it's really up to the students. Yes, we're good.
Yeah, so we just thought we'd do a quick chat. I think that 3 heads are better than 1. We are definitely not the experts with the holding all of the knowledge. We thought we would ask, so what are some strategies that you currently use to support your writers and maybe more reluctant writers? Or are there any strategies that we discussed today that resonated with you and you would like to try? So I know that some people had already talked about, oh, I never thought about using paper choice in grade 3. But if there are any other strategies that you want to share or things that you do that you feel work really well with reluctant writers. I'll give you a minute to think about that and you can throw them into the chat.
Yeah, feel free to use the chat box or to ask a question. Lauren, this is when I think I'm going to demonstrate quickly my thing on my iPad.
Perfect.
If that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take over the screen. But you guys will have to take care of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
May not work, Lauren.
I don't see anything, Julie.
No, my computer is, oh, let's see, having the spinning. Okay, so I'm not going to share my screen. Oh, yes, I am. Sorry, people. This is I'm just going to share some ideas with you that I was sharing yesterday with Cindy, I think, but this is something that can be used, like thinking on your reluctant writers. It would be definitely geared towards the lower grades, but this is something that I want to share. So when we're talking about putting the ideas, like we want students to put their ideas as quickly on paper. Whoa, don't want to see this. So one thing that I would often, and this could be for your ELL students, I'm taking French immersion, or for your students who don't have the vocab. What we want is to remove as many barriers for the students to be able to put that message on paper. So the first thing, it might be that sketching. So I may tell students, okay, so what's your story about? The kid can decide to record themselves on an iPad as they're sketching, or that could be 2 separate strategies. So in my house yesterday, I had my dog, Bo, that went and ate my steak, whatever, something like this. So as a student, I may decide to do that sketching. See, I'm definitely not an artist. It can be as quick like this. Jody, I don't like that little smile you did. I thought I did a good job in my drawing. So then the next step could be for those reluctant writers. Okay, you may not know all the words, but instead what you may want to do is write labels. So you may label your drawing. So here, oh, I know that this is a dog. This is a steak. Oh, I can't remember how to write steaks. Okay, whatever, I'll leave it like this. Oh, I know this is a house. So what did my dog do? He ate the steak. So I'm labeling, I'm giving label. So we're asking students to sketch first, but then on the line, on the paper, depending on the needs of your students, as a teacher, so I may ask, okay, students, what I want you to do now is I want you to write your story using the label. So it might be, and if the student doesn't know how to spell the word, it could be I have dog here, so I'm going to write it here. Dog is a, oh, I know how to write naughty. Oh, I can't remember, something like this. He, oh, I have my label, ate my, I can't remember how to write steak like this. So the writing can look like this, filling the blank and doing that inventive writing. And this is why it would be super important to write the date, June 9, for example, because the next day that the students is doing, you can compare, look at buddy, you did not know how to write 4 words on that page, but look now at the progress, you're able to write every word, or you're taking risk. This is what we want. This, I would be super proud of that little kid. Say, you know what, you didn't know the words, but you knew the first sound, for naughty. That is fantastic. Now we're going to work on the other sound. Encouraging this risk taking is what's going to move our writers. Yes.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Julie. So while I'm sharing my screen back, there's 2 ideas. So Sally had said that she gets her kids to start their work on the carpet, and then when she sees they've gotten started, she'll tap them and they can move to their working space. And so this lets her, she said, have small group support for the ones that are having trouble getting started. And I think it's a really great idea as well, because then you see you can kind of get some really good initial assessment pieces, some diagnostic or formative assessment, if you will, of where the students are at in their writing, and even if it's something like the idea of a small moment. I always did that in like different subjects as well. And then Abby had said, which I think is a great idea, is using the booklet function when printing paper. And so that one 8.5 by 11 actually becomes 4 pieces of writing, which is a really, really great idea, so that you can definitely save a ton of paper that way. Now, so once you get into a grade 3, you start with notebooks. And so the idea with the notebooks is, like the writing piece in the paper is, that's their writing and their pictures. But when you get into the use and starting the use of a notebook, it's when they start talking about the process pages as well. So this is an opportunity when students are going to start to write down ways to brainstorm. So if you look at the little just gonna get my pointer. If you look at, like here, right? So they're writing down and they're comparing things. So perhaps this is a compare and contrast brainstorming page. And so here's another thing. So things you know a lot about, idea generators, webs, things like that. And so it happens when they're kind of jotting ideas down, like when I talked earlier about the timeline or creating an emotional response to things. These are things that they're going to put in their writer's notebooks. That's going to kind of help a jumping off point for their writing. One other thing that you'll notice is that they're decorated in elementary. And so first of all, you want the students to be really proud of their writer's notebook. This is their writing. This is where their heart and soul happens on paper. And so you want them to decorate it with things that are really important to them. So maybe family members or people that they love, or artists or musicians that they love, words that are kind of really resonate with them, so that there's a huge sense of ownership. On the flip side, when you have a student who's really, really struggling to write, you can also use it as a kind of a conversation piece. Like, oh, I noticed you had Justin Bieber on your notebook. Tell me about that. And then perhaps there's something that'll really spark their interest with that.
Just wanted to show them. Oh, go for it.
Mm-hmm. So, and what you'll see too, so kind of at the beginning of their book, it's where they're the idea generating. It's where they're going to be writing ideas down. And then what you want is, there's also going to be some like rehearsal pages, or where they're just trying the mini lesson strategy, things like that. And then once they get into actually drafting a big piece of writing, that's when you want them to make sure that they're doing things like double spacing. And because once editing happens, because editing is going to be super, super messy, and these notebooks are super, super messy, and they're supposed to be, because there's no finished polished piece of writing in here. You'll see students adding on with Post-it notes and arrows or different colors, and ways that we would do kind of boost our pieces of writing by adding in lines and things like that.
Sally, good question about how to keep the picture. It depends. Like I know I don't have mine with me, but I've used the packing tape to really pack it. So it makes it more resistant because that notebook will stay with them. Different book that you could use for notebook could be something simply like this, something like mine is all line, but you could have the one that has the space for sketching. Some teacher could be simply this. Or Lauren did a super, if in case you have money, these were fantastic. Lauren, how many she did find them at Costco. How much were they?
So I think they were, I want to say $20 for 8 books.
So more expensive than these, but that's another option if you want to have that feel of notebooks.
Mm-hmm. The crafter in me, pretending that budget was never an issue, I would Mod Podge the front of every kid's book. That's what I would do. If you guys know what Mod Podge is, it's just kind of like essentially like a gluey stuff that you stick on. That's what I would do to keep them on. Because you know you're going to have those kids that just all they want to do is pick them off. Okay, so now you as a mentor want to have a notebook as well. And so you want to have pages and you want to try them out. So a perfect example I can show you. So I have my writer's notebook right here. I have process pages as well. So if you take a look, for those of you that were at the lesson yesterday, this is my page. This is like my mini lesson page that I would physically use in my actual notebook with my idea generating. So this is things that I would have gone through with a dock camera if it wasn't, if I wasn't using my iPad in just the situation that we're in right now. And so you want to definitely have some process pages. And one thing that's really funny about students is they love to learn about you as their teacher. And so you also want to have some personal writing to share with them. And when I say personal writing, so the big thing that stood out to me was they want to hear about your life in things that they can connect with. And so I remember when I went to the writer's workshop training, I wrote about my wedding day. And then literally they had said, no kid cares about your wedding day because they can't connect with that. And it's like, oh, but it's like so important in my life, right? Or when you had your child, like they don't care. They don't care about your kid, or they don't care. Well, I want to say that because like a lot of your students will care about those things in your life, or they want to know about your kids or whatever, but they want to see your pieces of writing and they want to see you be vulnerable and raw in things that they can really connect with. So the one time where I was kicked out of my friends group, right? When I was in elementary school, or when I moved to a new place and I was really having trouble making friends, and things like that are kind of at their level as well. And Jody is going to be presenting with her notebooks in grades 5 to 8. So the things that you're going to talk about in grade 5 to 8 are going to be very different than the things you're going to talk about in elementary school, but they're going to love to hear all of the things that you did as a kid, and maybe some of the kind of the trickies that you had as a kid. So you definitely want to have some personal writing, because you also want to show your students that you are a writer too, right? A teacher is a teacher of writing, but she's also a writer. He or she is also a writer. So that's really important for them to see.
Lauren, can I just add for just 1 second? One of the things that really resonated with me was around that our students, you want your students to be able to see themselves in your notebook. So that's the connection that you're looking for. You know, things that really resonate, but that they can see themselves having to deal with at that particular time. And I think that really struck a chord when I was doing my training as well.
And that modeling in your notebook, that's when you do it during your mini lesson. I'm wondering if that's what's answering Kim's question. Let us know, Kim, if that wasn't your question. Something that we forgot to mention is that the notebook, we do not encourage students to use pencil. Usually it's, I have one here. It's these fine, and it really depends on each teacher. These one, the paper matte flare, because they don't leak. These are the good one. And that's when you do that ceremony. I'm sending you with the magic pen that will help you putting your ideas on paper. Like there's in one of the lesson, there's a big lesson about that. The idea is that we don't want students to waste time erasing their marking on this, but also because we want to show the progression. Now, right away in your head, you may say, well, but it's going to be messy, especially if students can go and read their story and add to it. So what we encourage is the use of Post-it. So as they're rereading their stories and they may decide, okay, I need to add an idea here, you add your writing on a piece of Post-it there. So you insert it. Another thing that we've seen is people using that line, like taking line paper, cutting slip of it. So they physically write it on a line paper and glue it right there. So that what we love about this again is that it shows that messiness. It's not the product. What we're teaching is that process.
Yes, and I think that using the pen is really important because you're going to have those students who are perfectionists and they're going to keep erasing, or they'll erase and then they'll get stuck. And as a learning support teacher, I actually use that in small groups that I had worked in. I never let them use pencils, and because they love writing with something new, because they usually will write with pencils, but also to teach them just to cross it out and to keep going, to not let erasing the words or trying it again or making it look perfect is going to stop your thinking. Don't ever let that stop your thinking. And so having a pen forces them to keep going because they don't have that opportunity to erase. The last thing I'll say about creating your notebook as a mentor. So we have mentor texts. We have authors who have finished, polished pieces of writing. What's really important as us as mentors to our students is to show students the messy part, the process of writing within our notebooks, our thinking out loud and our writing down. Sally, you had asked, you said you found that the grade 3 resource didn't have a ton of ideas for idea generating, and that there was tons in the grade 5. So giving them more strategies, would this be too much? I think that you need to know your class. You absolutely only want to give them one strategy and then give them time to try that strategy out. You don't want to kind of do a couple lessons one after another of strategies. But if you feel like there's maybe a couple more strategies that are going to really support them, then absolutely. So that's a lovely segue to our next slide, Julie.
HeartMap is a resource that's kind of going with that idea generation. So it's a book that's written by Georgia Hurd. That the whole idea of that book, she's using the Heart kind of like a graphic organizer, but the whole book is full of ideas on how to help support teachers, students getting ideas. So for example, I may decide to draw a heart map about my family. In that, I'm going to write everything that I love about my family. Some part, as you see in the picture, some part might be about the good stuff about my family, but at the bottom, I may decide to put it in gray, and it might be the parts that are annoying me about my family. I may decide to do another, oh yes, Jody, there's a few things now with that quarantine that I could say that there's a lot of the darker stuff that are annoying me, but whatever. Another heart map might be baseball. If I love baseball, I may decide to do a heart map about baseball, and I may decide to, in my heart map all my good, the games that we won, the things that were difficult, the loss. So it's just a way to keep track of your emotion, because as writer, we want to put our emotion on the paper, and that's a way to collect those emotions to use to be inspired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, absolutely using some more strategies, Sally, and I'll talk a little bit more when it comes to the anchor charts with that. Okay, mentor texts. Mentor texts are so important. Mentor texts are showing students what good writing looks like. However, it's not just about what good writing looks like. It's about what moves the author is doing. What is the author's craft? What are some things that you are noticing within this piece of writing that are really good and that you could use in your own writing? And so an example that I always like to use is, so Carl Anderson, again, you're going to learn about my love of Carl Anderson. So he is like the king of conferring, and he has just like mentor text that he can spew out at all times. So, but what his example is because students are always like, well, I don't want to copy things. But his example that I loved was them when you looked at the work of the Beatles, because he's a crazy Beatles fan, is a lot of the inspiration that they got were from different artists like Buddy Holly or Bob Dylan. And so you're going to hear elements of some of their style within the songs that the Beatles have written because they use them as their mentors. I can't remember the artist, but I was listening on the radio. This was like a year or so ago, but they were interviewing a band and they had said that Iggy Pop was their mentor for this song. So they even said the name of the Iggy Pop song, what they loved about that song, and how it inspired this song that they had written. And so, you know, there's a difference between copying and and using something as a mentor that you want to emulate in your own writing. And so using mentor text is something that you're going to see a lot in Writers Workshop. And if you were with us yesterday, you would have seen that I used a text, and that was our mentor text. So it was The Night of the Veggie Monster by George McClements. And so the idea there is it was about one moment, one small moment with a lot of emotion. And that was the point of the entire lesson, was writing about a small moment. So we were talking about how George McClements wrote, he could have written about everything. However, he decided to write specifically about this one small moment about how eating peas was like the worst experience ever for his son. So what we'll do is, so this is a link here to a really great resource of mentor texts for first and second grade divided by genre. So here, some narrative first grade, personal narrative, or even narrative fiction, realistic fiction, books, some really great mentor texts. Here are some more mentor texts. And so there are mentor texts given to you in the Writers Workshop kits for most of the grades. Once you get a little bit higher, it's not the case. But also creating your own kind of mentor text as well is something that's going to be really powerful. Okay. We talked in our first session about anchor charts, but we referred to them mostly in the sense of using it as your way to kind of build your routines and your expectations. But every lesson or kind of idea that you're going to be talking, not every lesson, but every kind of, there's some big overarching things that you will see within Writers Workshop are always going to have anchor charts. And like we had said before, you know, this is something that you want to be live on your walls. You don't want it to just be a decoration. It's something that you want students to be able to refer back to and use. So one of the questions that we've had a couple times is about increasing independence and how are we going to make sure that students are on task and being able to write during that independent time while you are meeting with small groups. And so the anchor chart and teaching your students how to use their anchor charts are so important. So not only for your routine and expectations, but for the process of writing itself. And so the one thing that I love that you say about anchor charts is anchor charts hold the thinking. So you can present your mini lesson or your teaching point, but students need that anchor to hold on to know what to do. And so the one thing that I really loved is an idea that we learned about is, so here are what the anchor charts are going to look like that are provided to you in Writers Workshop. And these are things that you can print out. Some of you will also notice that it's a big stack of they look like Post-it notes. And these are your anchor chart things that you can put onto chart paper. But what we really loved was we saw a teacher, what she did was print out the anchor chart and she put it on the table for the students. And so the students had the anchor charts sit physically at their table. So when they were thinking and perhaps getting stuck or needing some more support, they would refer back to the anchor chart, which was referring back to the lesson. So an example here is small moments. So think of a story in your life, picture it in your head, put it down on paper, right? So that's a really kind of the simple beginning grade 1 anchor chart as an example, but having that and using a lot of images to help students understand the process that they need to use in their writing.
And for those anchor charts to be useful, you need to refer to them all the time. It's not that cannot become just a decoration on the wall, right?
Yeah.
That's why having that proximity.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last thing that we're going to do and talk about today are partnerships. And so we do want partnerships to be really intentional when you plan for your writer's workshop. And so you'll see in the mini lesson component of active engagement, it's often turn to your partner and discuss X, Y, or Z. And so some things that are really important, especially in younger grades with partnerships, is that, first of all, it's something that needs to be modeled, right? I think that we need, as teachers, we need to show them what kind of give and take looks like, a good partnership conversations, building the routine of kind of what the partnership is going to look like. But if you look at the slide on the right-hand side, even giving them prompts. So I like the part where, or this part made me think about, or a new idea I have is, and even having and coaching students into saying, so if a student was to share their idea, having the other partner say, well, why was that important to you? Or why did you think about that? Or what emotions were you feeling? So again, this is something that's going to be built over time, and especially having kind of partners ask each other questions to dig a little bit deeper in their writing. And it's something that's going to be evolved over time, because when you get into higher grades, then your partnerships are really going to kind of be more intentional on what you want to be able to do with each other. When you look at the partnerships in lower level grades, however, you want to make sure that the students are writing around the same level. So when we go back to talking about that reluctant writer who is really, really struggling to even get on paper, and then you have that other student who is just writing page after page after page, those are not partnerships that are going to support each other. And so you want students who are going to be able to support each other based off of how they're writing. And the last thing that I'm going to say about partnerships is talking about A-B partners. And so how many times have you like turn to your partner and blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, well, do you want to start, or should I start? So you want to establish routines, because your mini lessons are so short. So it's called A-B partner. So turn to your partner. Partner A is first going to share their small moment, or partner B is going to ask you the questions, right? So that there is a lot of, there's no time wasted in the little bit of time that you do have for your partner shares. Okay, so we definitely talked a ton today. We have a couple more minutes left, so we want to just get you guys talking a little bit more, asking questions. That's why we're here. So one of the prompts that we came up with today was, all of this sounds great, but, and so we know that there's always going to be a tricky here or there. So if you have anything, you're here because you have come across a tricky in Writer's Workshop, or you're anticipating some trickies, please, this is the time to ask them. And I think that oftentimes when you ask a question, there's a lot of people thinking of the same question. And so ask away.
We want to hear your butts. Goodness, ladies, again, we must have done a wonderful job. I don't hear any butts.
Yeah, and just talking, Sally, as well, if you even just look up grade 3 mentor text for narrative, like just Googling it, if you're not on Facebook or whatever, you'll find so many. That was just one specific resource. And there's a couple books as well on mentor texts. Sandy, great point. Kids don't easily see what they're missing in writing, and often don't want to go back and revisit. So this is when, and this is something that we're going to talk about in conferring. And so this is something that we need to coach students to do. And when, so they're, if you're asking, oh, what are you working on your writing? Oh, like, no, I'm done. I'm good. Right? And so this is when conferring becomes incredibly powerful. And then there's moves that you can make if a student is maybe hard to kind of move in terms of what they want to work on in their own writing. And so what becomes incredibly powerful with the conferring stage is that you get students to have more of a metacognitive process in their own writing and be more reflective. So when we show you videos with conferring, you'll see the power of what conferencing can do. So in some of the videos that I've watched of people, of Carl Anderson again, conferring, the things that students will say is astounding to me. And so that made me really reflect on my own conferring practice, because if the student's like, well, I want to work on my introduction, and you're like, oh, okay, great. And here's some examples. So what you really want to do is you want to create some opportunity to have that really important dialogue within talking about what they're working on in their writing, because there's always room for improvement. But also, if they don't want to go back to their writing, maybe just pull a piece out of their writing that they can work on, so they feel like they don't have to restart the whole thing, or put a Post-it note in so they don't feel like they have to kind of change everything. I just want you to put a little arrow in, and that's something that you can add in. So we can talk about a couple of those things, but definitely giving them some strategies even to how to add things in. There's a thing about
Julie, there's a question around notebooks, about whether yours is a duotang or an actual notebook. I think probably you guys can weigh in, and you can stop me if this is like too much of a middle school, high school thing. But I think my preference would be to put it in your own notebook, like an actual notebook. The reason I say that is because I actually had a duotang that I was keeping loose leaf drafts of papers that I had been writing, or stories I had been writing. And then what I found is that then those papers got loose, and then they got misplaced, or they got stuffed into a unit that I had used previously, and I couldn't find them. And so just having them in an actual notebook is in one place. It's easier to lose pages than it is to lose your entire notebook. So that would be my response.
So just responding to the question about how long do the units last? So one unit is one coiled book. So narrative, it's the genre, that's one that you're going to keep your partnership for just this. So not the whole year. Your partnership is going to last for one of these. And then in terms of how long it lasts, it depends on how you run it. So this, for example, there are 21 mini lessons. So that's 21 classes. That's 21 days. However, like we had said at the beginning, you don't necessarily have to do all of the bends. So you want to do bend 1 and 2. So that's 13 lessons. But if you feel like you can't even get through the entire lesson in the 25 minutes that you have of writing, and then you come back into that same lesson in maybe the mid workshop teach, then you kind of need to use your own discretion of how far you go. So we say definitely get through bend 1 and 2. So about 15 lessons worth. And depending on how often you're doing writer's workshop will depend on how long that will go weeks wise.
We're saying out now, we realize that a lot of people may have other Zoom meeting to go. So this was the end of our chat. Feel free to stay on if you have more questions. We're going to stay on, but otherwise you're more than welcome to leave us. We won't be insulted. Thank you for your time today, people. And reach out if you have any but that comes, send them to us as an email, and we will reply to you. Yes, Sally, good point. If the kids didn't have the experience in writer's workshop in previous years, I can get through the whole unit, yes. And I think we need to, I think I shared that tips yesterday. When you start a unit, I would strongly recommend to right away establish the date for that celebration. So guys, we're starting in September. Before Halloween, we're done. So let's do our invitation where we're going to invite our parents to come in the class. Doesn't matter if you haven't done all the lesson. Stretching it past 2 months, the kids will get tired of the stories. You lose that motivation. So 2 months max, whether you're done or not, all the sessions.
Yeah. Don't look for mastery.